What are they even doing out there? The STM32 invasion has begun. Now this is going to be a quickie video because I just wanted to toss up something here before I have to get back to my actual work. I do things other than the channel, you know. But I got a notification that this is happening right now, and if anyone's interested, I'll put the links that I ordered this stuff through in the video description below. It's all AliExpress stuff, so if you're wary about AliExpress, you can just put the brakes on it for right now. These aren't going to be affiliate links. These are just regular links, so if you wanted to support the channel and like wait and hang on, see how this stuff pans out before you buy it from someplace closer, you know, like Amazon or something like that, you can also do that as well. Obviously, I'll put those up in another video as they become available. First off, I apologize for the video quality. I'm doing this with a webcam because I didn't even want to take the time to tear down the space to set up my proper stuff. I'll do some color grading and try to fix it, but there's only so much I can do. Words. Anyway, as some of you have been following the channel know, I took a pause last month to do like other things for the sake of my sanity and because I wasn't very mobile, and I had to put a pause on a couple things, but one of the secret reasons I did that was because I had secret information. Now, I don't have inside relationships with like manufacturers and things like that. I do have inside relationships with a lot of nerds. And I've worked on a couple different projects, and I do things behind the scenes with people and that type of stuff. So anyway, there were some murmurings that these things were happening, and I had to put the pause on a few videos, namely some like board review stuff. As you know, I got one of my viewers had an Ender sent over that I'm going to be using for a live stream and like a Pimp My Ender kind of series. But I wanted to make sure this was going through before I move those from the back burner onto like one of the front burners. Let me give you a sneak peek of these boards that are coming out. I think this information just dropped today, so I can talk about it. Two things there. One is that there was a new driver coming out from Trinamic that they were rolling some of the things the community was complaining about into the design and making it better specifically for 3D printing. And that's going to be called a tmc2209. And they're doing pre-orders for that right now. Pre-orders, maybe just orders, but I don't think they're going to be, the actual physical chips aren't going to be sent out from Trinamic until next month sometime. So I put in my order for like 2 of those today to test out. That obviously put a brake on the step stick torque testing video, which has been in the works forever and ever, but the brakes were put on that by the rumors of the 5160 etc chips, and those came out, and I was like, finally I get to do this. And then they were like, oh, and we're doing like a UART version too, and I was like, oh man, I gotta wait for that. So anyways, those, like I said, I put those on pre-order, and I guess the middle or end of next month they'll be coming in. I don't know exactly when it is, because I decided to go and get one of what I predicted to be the popular, you know, clone boards. So I put in an order for a couple of the BIQU step stick format guys. Also, there was a board with those 2209s integrated onto the actual board in like the small surface mount package that was going to be super cheap, like relative to buying virtually any board and those step sticks separately. Because as you know, the Trinamic step sticks, when you get them off of like, you know, Amazon or something like that, they can be like 15 bucks or so. Sometimes they're even more depending on like where the supply is. I get mine unassembled, usually from DigiKey, or just order them from, you know, China, and they're a couple bucks cheaper. So it's usually around like, you know, between 8 or 9 bucks and like 12 or 13 bucks or something like that. But if you take that and multiply it by each of your axes plus your extruder, you know, you're going to end up with like 40 to 60 or $70 worth of drivers, no matter what board you put in. So even if you're sticking that in like a $10 ramps board, you're talking like 70 some bucks right there. And then if you're taking that and popping it into like a rearm, you know, the rearms, even the clones are like 20, 30 bucks. And like the ones right from Panikit are like, what are they now? Like 45, 50 bucks, something like that. And a lot of that stuff didn't exist when I was starting this channel, but you could see it kind of like being in the works. Now, I don't usually do like news segments to talk about things that I don't have the hardware in hand and haven't worked with, but I do have some of this hardware in hand and a history with this particular series of controllers, so that's why I'm doing this. So the reason this video is so long is because I'm going to have a little story time after this. So I'll do this section where I introduce the boards, which is what most of you are going to be interested in. And then if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you don't have to. As always, I have timestamps in the index in the video description so you can skip around. And then story time is just if you want to sneak peek, you know, behind a curtain a little bit to see how the open source community works with this kind of things, where you have a couple like altruistic tinkerers who just want to make cool stuff for the community and other people with, you know, virtually no personal monetary gain on the line or something like that. Just trying to give you cool stuff for the sake of giving you cool stuff and pushing the industry forward. And that might also give some insight into like why this stuff takes so long sometimes. But anyway, let me give a look at some of these boards. So I just got all this information off the AliExpress store of these various companies, and obviously as well, I'll get much more in depth as I do my homework before these come out and with testing after they come out. And for those of you who support me through, you know, one-time contributions or Patreon or those types of things, thank you very much, because I've squirreled that money away for the last like month or so in order to be able to get all this stuff. So I placed a ginormous order this morning, couple $100, and hopefully all this stuff will be coming in one big chunk and not like trickling in over the course of months. But anyway, let's see what we're talking about here. Now, this is old news. We already know that Big Tree Tech a little while ago put out the SKR and the SKR Pro. They are just massive versions of like smoothie board that are, you know, single board type arrangements, and they all work off of like the LPC chip and that type of thing. But the slightly newer news is that they have these SKR minis, and those use STM32 chips and have removable drivers, and pretty much everything you need is on the board except for like the bed heater, but they have an output so you can use the external MOSFETs for that. But this is sort of like a bring your own driver concept, and they're super cheap, like cheaper than a Ramps Mega sandwich, which is nice. And I do have one of these in my hot little hands, and I'll be doing like a rundown of that, showing where the firmware is at the moment, like what's supported, what's not, and that type of thing. But that news is days old by now, and the reason that I mention it is because this board is available right now. I'll put a link down in the description to Amazon, where, you know, if you're on Prime and all that, you can have one in your hot little hands in a day or two, which is useful for anybody who wants to immediately get involved in like the development side of this before the new stuff even comes out, just to see what's supported in the firmware for this particular chip series. So for $15 investment plus whatever drivers you have lying around, you can go ahead and start tinkering this ahead of these new boards coming out. And anyone with experience with the new Marlin HAL or other firmwares or these particular chips can kind of get some stuff out there by the time it hits the, you know, population at large. But let's talk about the new hotness, which is these guys from BIQU and FYSETC, which are the SKR Mini E3 and the Cheetah. And I'll give a little sight unseen rundown of each of these. First up, the BIQU/Big Tree Tech board. Now, this looks like a great general board, but it also looks like they were poising this at a niche in the market that already exists, which are users of the Creality Ender 3 who want to go to 32-bit easily. And one of the nice things is it seems that the screen that's already on the Ender 3 will just be able to plug right into this, which is fantastic. So obviously, since I have Ender 3 stuff coming up, I wanted to jump on this as soon as I could. Also looks like they have integrated UART control for the drivers, which is nice. 24-volt support right out of the box. And it looks like they put in the legwork on a bootloader that'll load the binary from the SD card, kind of like Smoothie does, which is also very nice. Because that was something that I messed with like years ago, and I just couldn't get it to fit on the smaller chips, but there's plenty of room on these. And support for like BLTech, which is nice. I don't use it. I use the inductive stuff because it's cheaper, but it's nice that it's there, and I'm sure it can be hacked for regular inductive. And if I'm translating this properly, it looks like they have stall guard on there as well. So yes, sensorless homing, which is something that the tmc2209 didn't have, that the SPI versions did have. And that's something that I've really been rooting for on the UART compatible, like serial controlled ones, because of all the weird SPI stuff going on with, like, you know, Marlin and the full graphical displays and all that stuff. So problem solved there. Looking closer, it looks like they also have support for, MOSFETs for the fans, the heater, and the bed. And looking at the bed MOSFET, it appears to be one of these, which is nice because this is the same one that's used on the Duet, and they haven't had any problems with those. And like a low RDS on MOSFET combined with like 24 volt, you shouldn't have any problems with those melting down at all. Other little niceties, onboard replaceable auto blade fuse, that's nice. I don't know what this 5 volt spread thing is, I'll have to check that out, but we'll see what's going on there. Onboard USB, mini USB jack, nice. Onboard SD card, also nice. Onboard TFT headers for presumably their own like TFT touch control board. As well as an RGB header. I don't know if that's like the super bling kind of like computer build gaming enthusiast RGB, or if they mean RGB monitor. Who knows? We'll find out. The inductor on the left of the board shows that it's likely a switching regulator for step down, which is nice. Don't have a lot of heat there, and you won't have to worry about popping the regulator for the things that they say you can run off of it. Although there's also a linear regulator in the middle of the board, so we'll see what's going on there. And it looks like they have put some breakouts to pins on the trinamic drivers, which is nice. I don't know if that's for expandability or one-time programming or whatever that's for, but we'll see. Now, as far as like the open source stuff, they've given the layouts, the pinouts, and all that. It's nice to have those pinouts and the assignments on the microcontroller. Big Tree Tech has been pretty good lately about releasing a lot of these files. They don't release their like board etch files and things like that, which some people in the community be like, meh, and other people will be like, yeah, whatever. That's a whole different discussion about, how open source was handled with like the RepRap project, and it released like hardware under software GPLs, and everybody got confused and nobody really knows where it stands. So I could make that video if you want. I probably will in the future if it comes up enough, but as of right now, at least we have like the pinouts and presumably the schematics to follow. So now let's compare and contrast really quickly with the FYSETC does not compute board. I couldn't find high-res pics, so I'll just zoom around here. It looks pretty similar. It has the onboard tmc2209 drivers, the UART drivers. You can see right there it has a CH340 serial chip, so they're not using the onboard serial from the STM chip, which is a little weird, but whatever. And looking here, other similarities, it'll handle high voltage. They say 7 to 35, probably more like 8 to 24 or 30 or something like that. Integrated low dropout regulators. It doesn't say that's a switching regulators, are probably LDOs. Hopefully that'll deliver enough current without melting down. It has the onboard ST/TF card socket, that's nice. An expansion port for the 128 by 64 control panels. It says it'll also deal with the Creality control panel. Also has the onboard RGB control for people that are into that kind of stuff. Fan controls, 24 volt or 12, nice. And they specifically say what pins they reserved. For example, up top it says AC blackout protection, filament detection, BL touch, etc., etc. I have no bloody idea yet what MOSFETs they're using here for the bed and the fan and all that kind of stuff, so that's to be determined. It looks like they may have level shifters for some of the things that presumably don't work on the 3.3 volt logic. If that's true, that's very nice because it'll allow you to bring legacy peripherals. Again, we'll see. And like the BIQU board looks like replaceable fuse and thermistor inputs, not thermocouple inputs. So yeah, pretty similar concept, and we'll see how both of them pan out. I don't have one of these on order, but if more information comes out and more of the source files come out, I may or may not go to one of these as well. So now let's talk about the trinamic drivers that are on both of these. So yeah, this is the next generation of the UART controlled stuff, which again, I said I liked because it frees up the SPI and you don't have to worry about all the signals interfering with each other, and because the SD cards in the SPI, some of the displays and like all that stuff. So UART control and step direct control, that's nice. It has microplier, obviously. It'll do natively or interpolation up to 256 steps and handle up to 29 volts. It also looks like it'll be able to pump up to 2 amps RMS, which is nice because it'll max out those cheapy like $7 2 amp motors that are all over the freaking place. It has the stuff that we expect, like the short detection, microplier, says it has Cool Step, which is nice. I don't think that's supported by any 3D printer firmwares yet, but it's nice to have it there. It also has Stealth Chop 2, and it appears that they have moved to a higher speed regulator for these, so hopefully that'll solve some of the layer shift problems that have been going on. And Stall Guard 4, which seems to be at this moment unique to this chip. I could be wrong, but that's what it looks like from a cursory examination of the page. And Stall Guard, or stall detection, whatever they want to call it, which presumably means you'll be able to use sensorless homing with the UART chips, which is not something you could do until now, which is very nice because now they're fully featured. So let's just cross our fingers and hope that all that works when it comes in. Again, any people that want to tinker around with some of this stuff ahead of the things coming out, please do contribute to the community. And I do have some of these on order separately in stepstick format, so I'll be examining those as well as the new SPI like 5160s and all that stuff. Another fun feature is right here, and it says simultaneous use of Stealth Chop and Stall Guard, which is not possible on the older chips. You have to run Spread Cycle for Stall Guard, which means you also have to be able to toggle back and forth between those modes for your initial homing, which is done in Stall Guard, and that caused, or which is done in Stall Guard, which is done in Spread Cycle, which has caused a few problems with like noise and things like that. So we'll see how this works out. And it looks like they've moved even to lower RDS MOSFETs for both the low side and the high side of the H-bridge. Very nice. Okay, that's all the news. Now for story time about my history with these chips. So you could just skip this if you don't want to look at this type of stuff. So story time many moons ago, and this was, to tell you how far this goes back, like this was going to be one of the first projects for this channel, was designing your own 32-bit board with everything integrated and sending away the PCB to be done and all like that. And that was to encourage people in the community that might have like something in my, you know, ramblings on that series missing that would just kind of like click into place, and then we'd end up with some decent boards and some competition in the market, lots of open source stuff, new information on new 32-bit stuff that's cheap, plus new trinamic drivers that are just the raw drivers on the board, which are cheaper, or a new stepstick format or something like that, that would bring the price of 32-bit printing and advanced features of those drivers down in price and more available to the community with, you know, more hands-on information and that type of thing. The problem I ran into was that there was virtually no, I think there was zero at the time, support for STM32 in any of the major firmwares. Now, obviously, Smoothie works on the LPC series chips, and Duet, or what's the company that does the Duet? Anyway, they worked on the SAM-D series, and predating them were a couple printers like the Malion M200 / Monoprice MP Mini, which I have two of those printers over there. Consequently, but they used a 32-bit chip and their own custom firmware that was built on top of Gerbil, but there wasn't any kind of Marlin support for that. Now that got tacked on a little bit because of the work of a few guys from the STM32 Duino project, which is recently defunct. But I was working with STM32 Duino guys, like just as one of the, you know, contributors that could, you know, download some code, try it out, make some tweaks on my machine, and then, you know, post that on the forums and say, hey, this is what got it working for me, that type of thing. And then took that with all the specs of the chips, figured out what all the pinouts and registers and all that should be doing, try to roll a lot of those features to make them available to Marlin's HAL for STM32, and the point was to make an excruciatingly detailed guide on how to get that working, what the pinouts were, how all these registers work, like what the assignments are particular to that board and that type of thing, and then present that to the community. I ended up not finishing that. I got like 75% of the way done or something like that. I built a couple custom boards. I bought a whole bunch of those little boards from overseas, and I hinted at that early on in my some of my 32-bit printing series. But it looked like when I was on the like Marlin boards, kind of like pushing work on some of these things, that a few people with more knowledge of those microprocessors and more knowledge about the Marlin 2 code base, which was very new to me at the time, were going to kind of like pick up the flag and like carry it forward, but it stalled in a couple places. When I first jumped onto it, there were two original guys that brought it over. The one dude dropped off, so it was only the other guy, and he was more interested in the smaller, skinnier, low power series that like doesn't have a whole lot of, you know, RAM and things like that to run any advanced features. But it's what they use on like the Malian boards and things like that, so it's what he was interested in. So I said, well, somebody has to pick this up for the other series and run with it. So I was like, let me take the next series up, that is the they call them like the low power, the mid power, and then the high power. It's like mid density, high performance, mid performance, consumer blah. ST has a bunch of goofy categories for these things, and the reason I picked that was because like Blue Pill boards and Maple Mini boards were like $1 or $2 a piece. They already had all the like little bootloader toggles and all the surface mount stuff that you needed for a basic board on it. It was very well documented. There were drivers for everything. There were bootloaders and firmware for everything. And then the fancier series with more features and more RAM and, you know, prog mem space and things like that, they weren't particularly well documented. They used all kinds of different settings for like the serial and the SPI. Even the way that it accesses the SD card was a completely different system. So I hadn't touched those, but it looked like there were a couple people who were going to get into that. And unfortunately, I think they all just kind of like shuffled off into the shadows to do their own, like, you know, proprietary stuff. Some of them like open source, but, you know, working on it on their own, as opposed to like with the Marlin guys. And we ended up in this like weird stalemate where a lot of the board manufacturers and the guys that were working on this were waiting for like the Marlin team to jump out and really make this stuff viable for everyday users, but Marlin was waiting for a product to be available that they could kind of like tweak the code around. And as a result, you ended up with a couple early STM32 boards like the GT32 Pro and things like that. And they ended up like, they got tired of waiting for Marlin and they wrote their own firmware from scratch. So the two of us, I think, that were working on this were kind of jumping back and forth between like the STM32 stuff, the Marlin stuff, some of that open source and some of the closed source stuff, along with some like ghetto, you know, hand-built code, and trying to get like a working project. But the big problems that we ran into were that it wasn't like Smoothie, where they took a piece of embed code and made the SD card bootloader thing. I tried to write one of those from scratch for like the Maple Mini and the Blue Pill boards, but there wasn't enough prog mem to run the necessary user space stuff for like FAT32 reading off the card and things like that. So I tried doing like FAT16 and slimming it down, and it was already slimmed down pretty good. I tried to borrow stuff from the Arduino project. Worked with the STM32 guys who had a really slimmed down HID bootloader specifically for those chips that was super small in prog mem space, but it didn't have the SD card where you dump the configuration of the binary file in there and then it flashes it to the memory or things like that. You had to like plug it in, your computer recognized it as a driverless USB like generic HAL device, and then you could just drop stuff onto the card or flash it yourself or something like that. But that also required some command line work, and which is fine for like Mac OS and for Linux. It got goofy in like the Windows realm, so you had people working with the DFU bootloaders, which is also goofy in the Windows realm. So it ended up the easiest way to do it at the time was just to take like an ST-Link or an FTDI or FT232 programmer and like stick that into the port. But then again, you were doing it from the command line unless you used ST tools, which were only available on the Windows side, and even then they hadn't been updated in like 3 years or something like that, and you had to register for account. And the actual hardware was fairly expensive unless you bought one of the clones, but it was a clone of a non-open source thing, so that was kind of that gray area there where you're like, well, anyway, it got complicated enough that the few of us who were working on it were dropping in and out. just popping in every like couple weeks, couple months with like little bits of information, and just hoping that some guys who were more readily available with this would jump in and pick it up and carry that forward. You know, guys that do this all day long or make money doing this and aren't trying to squeeze it in between like our jobs and our video channels and our other open source stuff and that type of thing. But the reason that I was excited about this was because even then you could see that like one of the most widely used embedded chip platform was STM32. And if you've worked in like the microcontroller space for any length of time, you could kind of see that, you know, that writing on the wall, or whatever, however you want to put it, that this is the way things are going to go in a big way once you have that like aha moment. So 2 years later or whatever it is, what I wanted to do, which was make a really cheap 32-bit board with a choice of integrated or add-on drivers and all the smart controls, support for like common panels and all that happy horse crap, that has been picked up by one of the big guys, which is BIQU Tech. And I grabbed their SKR board. The big one was based on the LPC smoothie stuff, so I wasn't excited about that. I had a bunch of people asking about it, but I already knew about like the LPC, like how the bootloader worked, the problems that had been with it since the beginning in both Marlin and Smoothie, but never noticed like the way that the boards are hardwired. You're already using some of the pins that are attached to the interrupts that you need for end stops. You can't go like interruptless end stop, or you can't go interrupt end stop polling, sorry, stupid bus brakes, and use it for your end stops at the same time with like trinamic drivers. Plus, when you toggle, as I've hinted at with some of the rearm stuff, if you toggle some of the advanced features with each other, like you get these weird like Leaning Tower of Pisa layer shifts in your prints, and that didn't seem to be getting addressed in any meaningfully significant way with the Marlin guys. I don't know if they don't have time or they couldn't figure it out, but regardless, it was only a matter of time before the STM guys came in, since that stuff was so cheap and already being used all over the place in mice and keyboards and robotics and other types of HID devices and USB bridges and just everything you can imagine. It was just a matter of time before they came in and just like blew the doors off of everything. Plus, they have a lot of features that aren't supported yet, which leave expandability for the future, which is going to be great, like internally controlled muxing. They're moving it forward in directions with like, you know, display interfaces and things like that. Way more different options for buses, higher speeds with like the SPI and things like that. High speed USB, native USB on the chip, so you don't need the separate driver chip, which is additionally expensive and quirky because the drivers for those, as you know, are goofy, especially like the CH340s. Much faster ways of accessing your SD card, which is going to be important for like, you know, Delta guys and even the higher speed Cartesian stuff. Native CAN bus support, native support for optical encoders, which could be rolled into closed loop control of your 3D printer on that board, even combined with CAN bus to facilitate communication between different devices networked together, so you can have skinnier chips to control the counting for each of the axes that are synced up over that bus through your main MCU brain or something like that, which could be all facilitated through your firmware. So it was very exciting to me when I saw that a few years back to say like, this is the future. And now we're starting to get those boards. So that's a very long way of saying there's a couple boards coming. And if any of you have experience with the STM32 stuff and things like that, feel free to jump into the Marlin GitHub page and like roll up your sleeves and put some work into it, because they have finite resources, finite manpower, etc., etc. And just to show you some of the boards that I had for this project when I was starting to tinker around with it, I grabbed some right here. Like, here's some of the like homemade stuff I made for that. This is a couple years old, you know, just custom hand soldered board there. I had another variant that would use these little Gerbil sockets. Here's another variant of the handmade board. Here's were various port expanders to give them more expandability options. And you have like the Maple Minis. You have the I'm sorry, that was a blue pill. Blue pill, black pill, Maple Mini, single board external step stick driver sockets, and with UART control, also plug-in EEPROMs for people that are into that kind of thing. Wireless cards, parallel to I2 SEER. This was the display driver that I worked with to get going on this, and actually has been working for several years if you have the right libraries installed. Was this just the parallel display to I2C, and that worked on STM32, as well as some of these external SD stuff which worked for the series that didn't use the whatever the faster USB interface was. This worked for those, as well as a bunch of different shields. So here was the one of the slightly larger, like the blue shields. This is a, what is this one? This is an RBT6. Oh, this was in case I couldn't get the built-in USB working. This was just a USB to serial interface. I got a couple little of the smaller ones, trying to use this with CAN bus for encoding to take the load off of the actual CPU, since like multi-threading is a problem, and really just a ton of other things. Like these are two of many boxes just filled with stuff for those STM32 experiments, which consequently took up a lot of time, and I ended up having to shelve it because the software support for firmware just didn't catch on. And I am not a professional when it comes to coding, you know, microprocessors, things like that. Like I said before, I'm just a guitar player who's a little too clever for his own good. And when I don't know how to do this stuff, I just bury myself in it for a period of time and like smash my head into walls until I finally break through. Okay, story time over. Here's the outro. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully that lights a fire under some people's butts, getting this stuff going, especially if you have experience with this platform. So I'll be picking at that in the background, but I don't want to do a review on that stuff until I see some support starting to happen, which it is just initially starting to happen. And I want to do that in anticipation of those other boards coming in. Because as you've seen, they have the great potential to be the everything killer. I mean, so cheap. 15 bucks for the bring your own modules and like 30 bucks for full trinamic support. So anyhow, thanks for watching, and until the next video, get out there and make something awesome.